Really excited to be with you today because not only because we're going to announce a new product, but also just because we can share so much more than when we were last doing an announcement. We have more gear in the field. We have more product out there. And we're going to share a bunch of data today. I think you'll really be interested in some of the data points we have put in the presentation. But we're really big fans, obviously, of 6 gigahertz and the decision that was made here in the U.S. and now is also being considered in a lot of places around the world. It was a big decision and a very good decision, especially to allow for reasonable power transmission for outdoor use, for FWA use. So we're really big fans of that, and it's obvious. I think all of us in this industry are, but we're also fans for another reason, because we believe the technology trend line, right, to harness unlicensed or lightly licensed spectrum is getting better and better. And that's the foundation of what Tarana was built on, was using technology, using processing, using advanced techniques to make spectrum more usable, whether it's a crowded spectrum or whether it's a clean licensed spectrum. And that's why we say, we named the presentation, Tarana plus 6 gigahertz is insanely great. 6 gigahertz is great, but you put it together with that technology and you get an amazing result. So I know many of you here are very familiar with Tarana, but since we have a live streaming audience, and I want to make sure that we share a little bit first about who we are and a little background on the company. And then I'm going to share a bit about the impact that I think the technology is having. We call the technology we built NG-FWA, or Next Generation Fixed Wireless. And I'll share a little bit, some data points on what we're seeing out in the field, in real deployments. I'm also going to cover, obviously, our new 6 gigahertz product, which is the reason for the session here today. A little bit about G1+6, which doubles the performance of Gigabit 1, and I'll go through the details of that. I'm also going to share a few thoughts on BEAD and actually the future of fixed wireless, because honestly, we're super excited about where fixed wireless goes from here. With the spectrum, with the technology advances, really the future is pretty interesting. So with that, let me jump in. A little bit about Tarana. First of all, for those of you that don't know us, the company's actually been around for a while. It's about 14 years old now, and predates me. I joined about 3.5 years ago. And this is a group of guys and gals who got together to really rebuild or rethink fixed wireless. And the real point is that there had been no system built from the ground up for fixed wireless. The previous systems that operated in the mid-band were either built for mobile or they're built for indoor Wi-Fi. But nobody had actually taken a clean sheet of paper and said, what would we do differently if we were building something for fixed wireless? And in fact, that's what this team did. And of course, that's an easy thing to say, but it's an incredibly hard thing to do, because you're talking about fundamentally changing the RF layer, all the layers of the solution. So it's a huge engineering project. A little bit bigger than I think the original team thought it might be. It's taken a lot of time. So there's about 10 years of R&D into this thing. R&D, product, iteration, and a lot of cash, obviously, to back this team to kind of get to where we are. But what we got for that is what we call next-gen fixed wireless, and this ground-up solution that actually makes a huge difference in what's possible. And it's based on a foundation that's it's termed distributed massive MIMO, which is basically processing on both ends of the link. And I'm going to talk quite a bit about that to kind of explain what's going on behind the scenes here to allow for this incredible performance. At this point, I'm glad to say we have a couple hundred customers, more than a couple hundred customers in 21 countries. So the product is getting fairly widely adopted and widely deployed, and we're super excited about that, including many of you here, of course. So what's really different about the approach is the distributed massive MIMO approach. The key words in this phrase here, autonomous, collaborative, learned, is really, really fundamental. That is, it's collaborative, meaning both sides of the link are intelligent, and both sides of the link are kind of working together collaboratively to figure out the best paths to send energy, so that you can get to the best possible solution for delivering RF bits across any arbitrary sector that we put up. So that's a really important and big difference. Secondly, with that visibility, we basically have use our antennas to place nulls. So what we can do is not only send energy very precisely, so we can figure out the right way to send it. We can also null, so we can stop listening to energy that's not ours. So we can be very selective, both in how we send energy, but also how we listen. And this is going to be very fundamental, and I'll give you some examples of this. What that allows us to do is really non-line of sight. And this has kind of been something that one of our earliest customers here, Ryan from Smartway, was one of the kind of first examples we had of a customer taking our product out and working with it and finding that it's getting reception where it shouldn't. In other words, it's getting non-line of sight, really high performance, and it seemed counterintuitive. And the reason it's able to do that is because we are actually taking many different reflections, many different refractions. We're reassembling all those signals and making them a stronger signal. So instead of a bunch of little one-bar signals, you're actually taking them all, mathematically combining them, and turning that into a much stronger signal, despite the fact you don't have line of sight. So this is really quite unique capability that's only can be done with a ground-up design that we're like the one I'm referring to. We also use that same really interesting platform that was born of many development to do something 100% unique, which is do unlicensed interference cancellation. That is to say, we're not only canceling our own interference, multiple cells of our own, trying to understand where our sectors are and canceling the signals that we're not trying to listen to. But we're able to, while in transmission, if a Wi-Fi or another signal comes up, or another base node comes up from another manufacturer, doesn't matter, we can in real time apply a null or stop listening to that. So we can, what normally would have disrupted the transmission can be silenced, and we can continue to transmit data. And all of this is all very interesting. And when we started the company, or when these guys started the company, and when I first joined, mostly what we were talking about is the technology. Now, the good news is we have a lot of results in the field, and that's what I really want to share. To illustrate how different this is, it starts kind of with the base node and the remote node. And you can see here a picture of our antennas in the base node and remote node. You'll notice it's quite different. That there's a bunch of independent radio chains. And what that allows us to do is get spatial understanding, not just at the base node, but at the remote node. And that's really important. And the remote node is a bit like a base station crunched into a small package. It's that intelligent. It's doing that kind of computation. So that lets us basically do really smart things on both ends of the link. And this is really key for uplink. And if you've worked with wireless for a long time, uplink is one of the toughest issues to deal with. And we've kind of solved that because we have a very symmetric system in that regard, based on this fundamentally different design. So I mentioned I'm going to share some real examples. This is a great one, and I think one of the things we've talked about is actually starting a kind of a crazy link contest, where we have people send us their best links. So we had a lot of feedback from people where they're surprised by the way in which the system can connect and actually provide hundreds of megabits. This is a great example here, and this is from Crow's Nest Broadband. And the comment is it's a game changer, because in this case, we're talking very much non-line of sight. The system is just figuring it out. It's using all that technology I just spoke about to kind of understand where it can send energy, where it's reflecting, it's putting it all back together, and it's creating this amazing result, 300 megabits down and over 80 megabits up. This is, prior to technology like this is kind of unheard of. And I'm going to show you some, I think, even more compelling data points here that I think you'll enjoy. One of the things this allows us also to do, this base technology I've been talking about, and I'm going to show you an example next, is allows us to do self-interference cancellation. This is really important because in many systems, even licensed systems, the self-interference ends up being a real issue, especially at the cell edge. If you're sitting at the cell edge, right, and you have a home sitting at the cell edge, and it's hearing multiple signals from multiple base stations because you've got a mesh of base stations installed, that home at the cell edge will start to have destructive interference. It won't be able to, it'll have a hard time distinguishing which signal it should be listening to. The problem in fixed wireless is you can't just drive your home to another cell. You're stuck in that cell. And the other problem with home broadband or fixed wireless is increasingly the demands are higher and higher. So, you need 40, 50 times the amount of bandwidth to serve a home than you do to serve a mobile. So when you're at that cell edge, what typical systems do is they'll start down modulating. That means they'll have a hard time recovering the signal, so they'll start using a lesser modulation, and you'll get a lower bit rate. And that can be okay if you're on a cell phone, because you're really actually not streaming, even with video, you're not streaming that much data. We know that when you have a house with 4K televisions, and you're kind of, you're running lots of things at the same time, you don't have that luxury of down modulating and all of a sudden the customer's having a highly variable experience. So one of the key things to make sure that you don't down modulate, and you can continue to, especially when you build out a network, a dense network with lots of base stations, is to cancel self-interference. And canceling self-interference sounds like it would be easy because it's your product, right? This is my base station. So if you're Nokia or whoever, you have all your base stations, all your remote nodes. You think you would be able to cancel your own interference, but actually it's not that easy because the systems have to be incredibly intelligent about where those other systems are, what frequencies are running in, and they generally don't do a very good job of this. One of the things we've done here is done what we call really nearly perfect self-interference cancellation. And there's a lot of technology that goes into doing this. Now, the reason I'm drilling on this is because it really lets us do some crazy stuff. And you can sum it up by saying unparalleled frequency reuse. So in other words, in this case, and I love this is from Resound here in Pampa, Texas, or down in Pampa, Texas. What you're looking at is a whole bunch of base nodes that are all operating at the same time in the same 5 gigahertz spectrum, right? And you can see that one node we pointed out, sector 100. So in normal wireless systems, many of you know this, most of you I'm sure know this, you generally use frequency 1 in one direction, frequency 2 in another direction. If you have neighboring cell towers, you'll do a different frequency there, so that you're not creating self-interference. In this case, all of these are operating exactly the same spectrum. And yet, we're getting these incredible performance characteristics. And the reason for that is we're autonomously understanding where all the our own interferers are, and we're canceling them. So we're not listening to them. This is unique. It's really not done in the other systems. And you can see the results here. I mean, if you're a wireless engineer, seeing a single link is not that impressive. This is what you want to see. You want to see what happens when you densify, and how does the product perform as you put more and more endpoints on the device. In fixed wireless, there's been a very tough issue with growing sectors beyond 30, 40 subs. In this case, we have 122 subs on that sector, and it's completely in a completely overbuilt area, all operating the same frequency. And notice that 73% of the links are capable of 400 megabits per second. We know that because we know the capacity of each of those links. So that's not to say that everybody's bought 400 megabits per second, but it says that you could offer a package at that speed. This is unheard of. These kinds of numbers are unheard of. So this is the kind of stuff that this foundational technology that I started talking about, where it starts to really deliver. And it makes the economics and the ability to build a system meaningfully different. Not a little different, but meaningfully different. I want to talk for a minute also about this technology I mentioned, which is, we call it asynchronous burst interference cancellation. What that means is you're running an unlicensed spectrum. And we're going to get to 6 gigahertz in a minute here, because this is going to become an issue in 6 as well. 6 gigahertz is pretty clean spectrum right now, but it's not going to be clean spectrum forever, right? It's going to get more and more usage, not just Wi-Fi devices, but multiple service providers. So you have to be ready for that. So if you invest in 6 gigahertz, you're going to want to be in a place where, as it gets more and more popular, your system continues to perform, right? And this tool is, again, built on that same foundation. You have to have the foundation first. You have to build a system that has all the visibility and tools to be able to deal with it. But once you have that foundation, you can do some fancy stuff. In this case, what we're talking about is canceling unlicensed interference, which prior to Tarana had really not been done. And it's a pretty interesting mathematical trick, actually. What you see there, by the way, if you're not familiar with a constellation, a quantum constellation, we had a T-shirt, actually, and it was before I got to Tarana. It's one of my favorite T-shirts. It has us, them, any questions. And the left is them, obviously, the right is us. So the point is, we take a very noisy constellation, that's a 256 quantum constellation, is 8 bits per symbol. And we take a highly interfered, messy constellation that normally would down modulate. It would go to 64 quantum, so it would start to slow down, and we clean it up. And we let it operate at full modulation. And that's what is so unique about this. And we have a video here that I want to share with you about a demo we do that generally blows people away. What you're seeing here is at our headquarters, and that was a remote node that we drive out and do testing with, and that's a base node you saw on the roof, and that's our Ghostbusters van right there. And this is a whole bunch of laptops that we put right next to our remote node, right? And these laptops, we force them to operate in the same frequency as our remote node. So what we have here, it's going to stop in a second, I'll explain what you're seeing here. So what we have here is we have one of our remote nodes. We have a base node, a distant base node. It's non-line of sight, right? And the remote node has a bunch of screaming children right around it. And the remote node is sitting there trying to listen to somebody 30 feet away. And the kids are screaming. That's the laptops. We force them all, again, into the same spectrum. So this is really a tough issue. What you're seeing here is kind of a couple of things. First of all, we start this demonstration with heavy interference. That's the laptops. But we have all our fancy tools turned off for the most part, right? We have the ABIC interference cancellation turned off. We have multipath integration turned off. We have those kind of fun tools we have. On your right, what you're seeing is, in fact, up top, there's some stats on the link. And there's going to be some arrows in a minute to show you what the stats are saying. And those red blocks in the middle there, those are the different subchannels that we have. And the color tells you kind of what they're modulating at. So if they're red, they're not modulating very well. They might be disconnected. As they get green, that means they're transmitting more data in each of those subchannels. At the bottom, this is really fun. You can see the waveform. And what we're plotting there on the right in particular is the quantum constellation of all of these subchannels. So you can see what's happening a little bit visually. It's really quite interesting as a tool we have for measuring our own systems. One thing I want to point out that is really key. On the bottom left there, what you see is our signal, which is that kind of thick line. And what's on this right is the noise that's occurring in the system. The noise is up to 1,000 times stronger. So the kids screaming are up to 1,000 times louder than what we're trying to listen to. That signal that's sitting across the way. So that's what's going on in the system. I'm going to advance it. You'll see what happens when we measure our performance here. So the system's trying its best right now to to support a bit stream, and it's struggling, right? And so what we get out of this is, as you can see there, 79 megabits per second down and 36 megabits per second up. It's not a particularly long link, so we're able to pull it together and actually provide some bandwidth. Now, by the way, this would not be a very stable system because the interference is asynchronous. It's coming up and down. So sometimes it's going to be good, sometimes it's going to be bad. It's going to suck. You're getting a customer call here. That's what you're getting. You're getting a customer call, and you're having to figure out what to do about it. So now we're going to turn on one of our tools, multipath integration. We'll show you what happens next. Here we are turning on multipath integration. Now already you can see that if you're familiar with quantum constellation at the right there, you see it's starting to modulate much more nicely, and it's finding ways. And you see the green block, so it's starting to have a meaningfully better. Now, what are we doing here to make this better? We're getting 262 megabits down. We're getting 84 megabits up. What are we doing? We're actually turning on the tool we have to spatially listen to each of those streams and add them back together. So to recombine, instead of just listening to one stream or listening to the streams in aggregate, we're spatially taking them separately. We're shifting them with math in space and time. We're adding them back together. We're kind of reconstructing a 5-bar signal from a bunch of 1-bar signals, to say, as a way of thinking about it. So that really produced some great results, but you're going to love what comes next. Now, when we finish with this, we're going to turn on ABIC. ABIC is our unlicensed interference cancellation that I mentioned. All those laptops are screaming right next to us, and you'll see what happens. You can see already that the constellation on the right is getting to more and more 256 QAM. So this is up modulating. And now we're sitting here, and we're about to show you what the result is. And we do this demo, for customers that come to our headquarters on a regular basis. We've done them in DC when we showed them to some regulators as well. We're getting 500. So one of the reasons we do this demo, by the way, is because unlicensed is no longer unreliable. We can make a licensed, unlicensed spectrum, especially 6 gigahertz spectrum, because of course it's cleaner right now. We can make it incredibly reliable. And in this case, we're getting 543 by 125 and 5 gigahertz. It's amazing. So this kind of thing generally blows people away. You can see all of the subchannels are working properly. This is just great, great stuff. So I wanted to share that with you because it's just so different, right? This is not achievable, really, has not prior to this been achievable, full stop. And it's that 10 years of work of building all those foundational tools, building all those chips, building all the pieces to be able to build on top of it this kind of crazy, interesting capability. So that's the demo, and I'm going to move on here, but there you see our magic chip. That's our baseband chip. It's been an amazing development. Let me show you some additional numbers that I think you'll be interested in. This is 50,000 links from our database of links, live links that are real homes up and running. And this is showing performance of 3 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. I'll get to 6 in a minute. I know you're waiting for that. So what you see here is the top is 3 gigahertz. The bottom is 5 gigahertz. And what you can see is the distance along the bottom. So that's up to 10 miles, 0 to 10 miles. And you're seeing the performance. What's unique about this, we also have the standard deviation on there. So you can see that they actually perform as, even when you get out to 5 miles, we're talking about hundreds of megabits, 300, 400 megabits per second with a reasonable standard deviation. Obviously, you're going to expect some deviation there. The standard deviation around 5 is going to be a bit higher. And we'll show you some more data on that here in a minute. But you can see the number of links at the bottom too, how many links are in each of those categories. So this is real stuff. And the average link capacity here is over 400 megabits per second. Unheard of. Unheard of. Just really remarkable. I think this graph is actually maybe as interesting, or perhaps even a little more interesting in some ways. What this shows is on the left, 3 gigahertz, on the right, 5 gigahertz. And what these graphs show is the amount of interference we're experiencing from other systems, from anything on the vertical axis. And the horizontal axis, we're showing how non-line of sight the link is. So the top right of that graph is really highly interfered, and it's really non-line of sight. It's a very bad place to be. In the bottom left corner of that graph is where it's completely line of sight and there's no interference. So what's interesting to look at about this is the number of links. So the size of the white ball is the number of links in that database that are in that quadrant or in that little square. So what you can see here is that 3 gigahertz is non-line of sight is superb. And that makes sense because it's higher power, right? It's higher power spectrum, and because it's better frequency for refractions and reflections. So you get a really nice distance. In 5 gigahertz, you see we're seeing a lot more interference, as you would expect, but you'll see that it actually performs incredibly well. If you look at the previous slide, even though we're seeing that level of interference, right, we're getting this kind of performance. So these are real numbers. These are real data. This is real stuff. This is not a model. This is what we're seeing in the field. What does this say? This says that we actually are overcoming line of sight obstacles, not near line of sight, non-line of sight, whether it's limited or even in some cases quite heavy, and we're overcoming interference when it's present, right? So another thing that this allows us to do, which is really unique, and I think if you've been doing fixed wireless for a long, how many of the people here have been doing fixed wireless installations for more than 5 years? There's a lot of experience in the room. So you well know that loading up, one of the problems, one of the challenges with fixed wireless is that it's almost you're a victim of your own success. The more you populate a sector or an area, the less you're able to put new subs on while affecting the previous subs or affecting the overall operation of the network. It's a really tough problem because where you make your money is by adding subs. And you get to a point where you can't add any more subs without affecting the overall performance. And actually, it gets worse over time because people need more and more capacity. It's a tough issue. It's a limiter on how far you can go with fixed wireless. That same foundation I was talking about at the start of the presentations lets us kind of break that limit. And I know that sounds too good to be true, so I'm going to put a few sectors up here. One from NextLink. Thank you, Cam, for letting us in. Bill, if you're in the room, for letting us share this on the right, and from Visionary Broadband on the left. Now, I will say that not all our sectors have 200 or 170 subs on them, 179. These are great sectors, right? And these are pushing some of the limits of what the system can do. The system is designed to go up to 250 subscribers. And as you can see on the NextLink sector there, those are the SLAs they're selling on that sector. So you can see the customers are buying 500, 400, a lot of 200, a lot of 100. So there's a lot of real, and in the case of Visionary, that's all 100. The smallest plan they offer is 100 by 20. So these are serious offers. This is not 25 stuff. It's not 10 meg. This is real broadband, right? And what you can see there is we're supporting with a single sector 179, 209. So this is for us, by the way, is, I will say for the team, and I know I speak for the whole team here in the back, this has been just so great because we get to finally see the technology sing. You know, it's one thing to have a lab and have a test and say, hey, look, it's doing it. But when you have it out there and you have more than 200 customers on a sector and the sector's performing, it's providing the service, customers are happy, that's when you know you've done something really interesting. So I'm sharing this because for us, fixed wireless is not a stopgap to fiber. Fixed wireless is next-gen fixed wireless allows you to do things it allows you to think of it as a complement to fiber. Fiber fits some places, this fits in other places. Both can be long-term answers for broadband. It's not a stopgap solution, right? So that's kind of very, very unique. Excuse me. So we call it, as I said, NGFWA. Oops, yep, let me just see here. Oh, I got it, okay. Yeah, one more slide before I talk about that. This is actually a really neat slide, and I think you'll enjoy this one as well. We always look for places where we can do side-by-side comparisons with other technologies, because, you know, where it's really, it's not easy to do, right? Because you have to find a sector where you put up a base node of another vendor, measure all the links, take that base node down, put up our base node, or have them both up simultaneously, put the remote node in the exact same place, and measure the links again, say side by side, how did the product perform in the exact same conditions? Because every sector is different. And you know, so you have to, and really to compare, you really want to do it this way. And we've had a few cases where this has happened. This happens to be about 20 locations where there's an Ericsson CBRS system, and using CASA, if you're familiar with CASA, as a remote node. So that's a kind of a higher end, you know, CPE for the remotes. And what we did is a side-by-side comparison of G1 versus, in this case, Ericsson running in CBRS. The nice thing about doing this in CBRS, the comparison is, both of us has to use the same power, right? If you use licensed spectrum, you can use a lot more power. So in this case, you're really kind of saying, hey, just take the technology. And what does the technology really do side by side? What does 3GPP do in fixed wireless? And what does NGFWA do? And this is a great example here, because what you can see, we're getting 84% of the links over at doing 100 by 20. And in the case of this particular set of 3GP systems, 16% of the links could do that, right? And you can see in many cases, the links don't even connect. And we have this experience often where customers that were unable to connect, customers in the past, they got the call, went out to the house, couldn't get it done, are going back and actually finding that they can serve that customer. So this is a good side-by-side for 3GPP. We like to show that because this is the right tool for the job. And we're not just talking about, you know, a little bit better. It's a meaningfully different result. So that's why we call it NGFWA, because it's next generation. It really is fundamentally something different. And it also is a full technology stack. It's not a piece of Wi-Fi equipment, technology, or a piece of 3GPP, and we put some more software. It's a completely different design, top to bottom. And that's the way these results are actually achieved. 6 gigahertz, finally, after all that. Maybe talk about the new product, huh? So 6 gigahertz, so we, of course, are shipping a 6 gigahertz product, and it's now available. We've made we started shipping this a few weeks ago, and we have some in our distributors already today. And it's coming in a new package, but it looks very similar to our current remote node. So there's new base station and new remote node. It operates in Uni 3, 5, and 7, right? And we're actually also the same packaging we're using for 6 gigahertz. We're actually doing that for our 5 gigahertz. So we've invested in 5 gigahertz. We're doing an update on the 5 gigahertz remote node as well. And it'll have that nice new packaging that's kind of neat for a little tighter, smaller, a little bit lighter. But the key here is that you're going to be able to install 6 gigahertz, and our traditional 5 gigahertz remote nodes, if you have houses that already have 5 gigahertz, will connect to the 6 gigahertz system in Uni 3. So if you want to bring 6 gigahertz into your current 5 gigahertz networks, you can. Or you can build new sectors with 6, or with 5. We're going to continue to support both, of course, because 5 supports Uni 1 and Uni 3. So this is the new product, and we have a few new features on it also. There's some signal quality indicators that will help installs without, it helps do an easier install without equipment. If you want to do that, if you have clean spectrum. Obviously, if it's a really crowded area, you're going to pick up other power signals, power noise, and so it's a little bit harder to do it. You'll want to use the tools that we provide, but this is actually a thing we've added to help out as well. The other thing that we're doing, which we announced a little while ago and now we're shipping in Q1, is G1+6. And G1+6 goes from 2 40 megahertz carriers to 4 40 megahertz carriers. So it's 160 megahertz of total spectrum. And this allows us to do gigabit. And so this is, previous to this, we had 800 megabits per second per link. And you could split that uplink, downlink. And uniquely, we were symmetric. So you could decide how you wanted to split it. You didn't make a sacrifice uplink for downlink. So you could do a symmetric service and still do 400 by 400 if you wanted to, if you had a perfectly clean link. So 800. That'll be 1.6 gig in the new system because we'll have 4 carriers. And we already had announced this, and this is something we have been working on for a while. Doubles our performance. And with 6 gigahertz is a really powerful combination because there's 850 megahertz of spectrum out there. And it's cleaner spectrum for now. And so you have plenty of room to put 4 carriers. So it really is a great, powerful combination to bring all that new spectrum and 4 independent carriers. I'm going to talk a little bit about that because it's not 6 gigahertz opens up a lot of possibilities, but also you have to deal with the AFC, and you have to kind of figure out what spectrum you can use at high power and what spectrum you cannot use at high power, which is an important part of this. So this is a lab system where, like I said, shipping X2 in Q1, but this is showing, in fact, about gig down and 500 up, which is pretty crazy. This is the real deal. This is a full OFDMA system, TDM. So we're getting that simultaneously. This is really, really, that's a nice service. That's an RDOF gig tier service right there, right? Offered on fixed wireless. So this is pretty amazing. We're really excited about shipping it, and the hardware that we have already supports it. I want to comment for a second about the importance of 4 carriers. So if you're familiar with these systems, you know that some systems have 1 carrier of 160, or they might have 1 carrier of 80, a contiguous carrier, a single carrier. Wi-Fi systems are more often like that. In our case, we have 4 40 megahertz carriers, and we think that's really important when it comes to 6 gigahertz, or in general. And you'll see why in a second. I'm going to comment on this. First of all, this is a location near our headquarters, and this is an interesting location because the AFC, which is the frequency coordinator, is telling us that you can only use those 20 megahertz channels. And if you look at that, if you have a system that only has a single 160 megahertz carrier or an 80 megahertz carrier, you're kind of out of luck. You're going to have to use 40 or 20, and then you're done. With our system, however, you can use 140 megahertz of the spectrum because you can take 40, 40, 40, and then you can take the 20, and now you have 140. So you're getting 140 megahertz, even though the AFC has told you that you've got this situation. And if you're not familiar with 6 gigahertz, there's incumbents in 6 gigahertz. The AFC tells you where you can transmit and where you cannot transmit. So this is telling you across that 850 megahertz of spectrum where you're able to transmit at high power. So this is really important, but I'll give you some more stats. We've been doing some work on this. We took a look at 717 sites that we're currently deployed at, and we tried to get a single 160 megahertz carrier, which some of the other systems require you use a single 160 megahertz carrier. In 22% of the sites, 22% of the 717 sites, you could not get it, right? And in 16%, you could get only one. And that's a problem too, because in those systems, you're going to want to do F1, F2. You're going to want to interleave spectrum. So getting one's not going to help all that much because you don't have the fancy tools to kind of do, frequency reuse. So what I'm trying to say is that it is really a challenge. It's going to be an interesting challenge to find spectrum if you want to use the full 160, if you want to get the full gigabit. We're going to make it much easier for you to get gigabit in many more circumstances. In this particular 717 locations, there was 75% of them, 75%, where we could do 160 by assembling 440 megahertz carriers. So we're much more able to take advantage because of the tools. Again, it gets back to the foundational design of the system to deliver gigabit. And that's kind of for us. We look at gigabit. I personally, we've had a bunch of conversations about gigabit. How many of our customers really need a gigabit? Well, you guys look at you guys see what's going on. You see when you give somebody a higher capacity, how much more bandwidth they actually use. The truth is, there's a lot of marketing involved, but it's important. But it's important that you have a gig tier in your marketing, and we think that's key. And we think we'll be able to deliver it in more places, and then if a customer buys it, actually deliver it. So of course, a lot of people are counting on 6 gigahertz being clean and new and fun. But over time, we know that's not going to happen. It's not the way it's going to stay. And this is what's going to happen is what else happens in unlicensed is that over time, that's going to become more and more crowded spectrum. And what you don't want to have is a system that over time degrades. So one of the things we can assure you is that this system will operate very well in that spectrum, and it will continue to operate very well. Again, our target at Tarana is end game broadband, not to put it in, ship it, take it out later. It's meant to be there for the long term. And again, the tools that initially seem like they might not be as important in 6 gigahertz because spectrum is pretty clean are going to become more and more important with time. I want a couple more slides, and then we'll take a few questions. I want to comment a little bit about the future because we're really excited about. We're not only excited about the products we're shipping today. We're excited about all the projects we're doing with you guys because I love the feedback we're getting from customers on their successes, working through the challenges, doing all the stuff you do as partners to try to deliver service. But we're long term. One of the things we have on our mind is that fixed wireless should be a tool that's here to stay, and not because it's our company and we want to sell stuff, because it has to. Because fiber is great, satellite's great. You need all those solutions to build broadband to everybody, but there's a missing piece for the long term, and that's where fixed wireless really plays. And this is an attempt at modeling how long until the 3GPP networks run out of gas, right? In terms of extra spectrum to deliver service, as T-Mobile and Verizon are doing. Now, there's a lot of assumptions in this. But you have to make a lot of assumptions to do it. And you can argue some of them, 15 bits per second per hertz per spectral efficiency, 300 megahertz. 300 megahertz is it's a pretty generous thing right now. That's about how much spectrum's out there. If you put it all to work on a tower, that's pretty generous in the model. So we did this modeling, and what we came up with was that over the next few years, if you tried to put 15% of the U.S. households, this is a U.S.-centric model, on 3GPP, you'd run out of gas pretty quick. You're going to run out of gas. So why are we talking about the spectrum crunch coming in mid-band? Because it's coming in licensed spectrum. Either one of two things has to happen. There has to be a lot more spectrum allocated, which is going to take a long time. It's going to be litigated and difficult, and so it's not a short-term solution. Or you have to make better use of spectrum. Those are your only two choices. There's nothing else you can do. If we're going to do fixed wireless to a lot of households, let's say 20, 30, 40% of US households, if you have it in your mind, that can be gigabit type service, 500 meg kind of service, that kind of stuff, there's not enough spectrum right now. You're going to have to do one of those two things much, much better. And so this is kind of a nod to the future. I'm sharing a little bit about our roadmap and about where we think the world needs to go from here. And in this case, what we're talking about is what if there was a system, hypothetically, that could anchor one carrier licensed, potentially, but use 6 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz also for the other carriers. So now you have kind of a licensed system. Why is that important? Because it qualifies for BEAD, right? It can sit in GA or in a PAL. You put one carrier there. Now it qualifies for BEAD. It's licensed. It's reliable. And then you can take complete use of 6 gigahertz spectrum for the other carriers. Wouldn't that be a cool way to go? It would be super amazing. It'd be insanely great. Our actual view is that this has to be the future, actually, because there's no other place to go. You're going to have to take advantage of both licensed and unlicensed. It doesn't matter whether it's high power license or CBRS, whatever. You're going to have to take advantage of both because there's not enough spectrum otherwise. So our view is this is kind of the future of fixed wireless, where you basically blend, let's say, NG-FWA-like technology in unlicensed, so you're getting really good results out of that spectrum. And sometimes using license as well if you happen to have that asset, or if you want to use through CBRS in order to qualify for BEAD. So for those of you that are thinking about BEAD and are interested in it, this future is real. And that's good that we're talking here about potentially one radio doing all of this, not having to hang multiple radios. That's a pretty interesting future, but we think it's the way the world has to go. And you can imagine might be what we're working on. I said might. I didn't say for sure. So in summary, I want to say, kind of our view is to fix broadband, you have to use the right toolkit. I mean, where it's sparse enough, that is the ARPUs are high enough, yeah, satellite. And satellite's always going to have some pretty serious limitation on the total amount of bandwidth, the number of subs you can put on that system. Where it's dense enough, where it makes sense, yeah, sure, fiber, why not? I mean, it's a good solution. It's a great solution. There's no problem there. But you got this really big opportunity and important sector everywhere else, where it's not sparse enough, where satellite can actually solve it. It's not dense enough where the economics really fly without subsidies. And that's where we think this technology, growing up, this technology to next generation, where it can be a long-term solution, really sings and makes the difference. It's the missing element in the broadband scene. So that's kind of the mission of Tarana. It's kind of what I think we're 14 years in. I think we got a number of years ahead of us here, kind of taking this tool to the next few levels. So with that, I want to bring Sergio Nadeschi up with me. He's one of the founders of Tarana, that is been there for the whole ride. And we're going to answer any questions from the live stream and also from the room that you might have as we go. So thank you for your time. Oh, they need to bring Sergio a microphone, yeah. Otherwise, he has to talk to my lapel. That wouldn't be great. If we have to, you got to do it. Got to do what you got to do. Now we're good. Any questions?
Hi. Assuming you have unlimited capacity on the back end,
Yeah.
just how many subscribers can you connect to a single base node operating at that full 400 megs or up to a gig, like you were saying, for the 6 gigahertz before that system starts to get overpowered?
Yeah. Well, Sergio, you can add to this, but first step, all these systems are, of course, have an amount of bandwidth to share. And in all fixed access systems, by the way, this applies not just to wireless, it applies to GPON, it applies to DSL, it applies, everybody says it's dedicated. There's no dedicated bandwidth in any access technology. At the end, there's a backplane, it's shared. And for good reason. Statistical multiplexing works, and everybody gets what they need. So what you end up doing is allocating a certain total amount of bandwidth among those users. And that number is going up over time. Like, what is the average bandwidth a house needs? Where you set up your system, and that, let's call it 4 to 5 megabits per second right now per home. That would be, I think, a good number to use in that range. That'll go up over time. If you do that on our system, the current system, you can handle 150 to 200 homes and deliver those services. And you saw that. Those were real sectors that are delivering those services. 256 might be a bit of a stretch, because at that point you're overtaxing potentially the amount of bandwidth you have. But of course, remember, you have to have the backhaul behind it as well. So you're going to have 2+ gigabit per base node per sector, so about 10 gig off of the tower. don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think you answered it quite well. Of course, this depends on when are you asking the question. Are you asking the question now or in 3 years from now, and how do you want to provision your network? You need to look first at how much bandwidth does a user typically pull at the peak hour. And that's really the provisioning rate. So right now, if you look at the peak hour, depending on the operator and the location, you see anywhere between maybe 3.5 megs per user downlink on average to 5 or 6. And that's supposed to grow, 15-20% year over year. So if you want to have enough capacity and also provide high SLAs, you first need to make sure that the sector has enough capacity to support this provisioning rate at the peak hour. So let's say 5 megs a user times, say, 150 users. It's 750 megs. And then on top of that, you need to have additional extra capacity so that users can peak. And if you have SLAs which are pretty high, say 400 or 500 megs, you need to make sure that you have that additional capacity there so that they can peak. So depending on when do you want to provision it for, how many years in advance, and what the SLAs are, and specifically the highest SLAs are, you need to make that computation and over-provision it accordingly. But obviously, it's very clear that you need to be prepared to evolve the network over 5, 6, 7, 8 years in order to keep up with the increasing demand per subscriber, which is why we have a fairly rich roadmap that keeps increasing the capacity of the sectors, and you'll be able to do so with fairly minimum upgrade headaches, as you'll get to see hopefully in the future.
Thank you. Very impressive. Thank you.
I do a question back here. No. Give me one second. We have a question back here afterwards, Chris. Yeah.
How does this 6G compare in non-line of sight environments compared to other Tarana products?
You mean 6 gigabit or 6G?
6G.
6 gig. Go for it. Well, I mean, you're saying how does it compare to the other frequencies?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, from a frequency point of view, right? The lower frequencies are better in terms of distance, and of course, CBRS has higher power as well. So 6 gigahertz, and maybe Sergio, you want to share a little bit about what your view on distances for 6, 5, and 3.
Yeah, the 6 and 5 gigahertz are very, very comparable. They're, the link budgets is similar, and then the propagation loss delta between 5 and 6 is 2 to 3 dB. So you're going to have a fairly similar range that's achievable. Now, in 6 gigahertz, you have the advantage that you have more spectrum available and cleaner spectrum available. So I would say that the ranges are quite comparable, and non-line of sight performance is very comparable. And actually looking at the results side by side, we can confirm that that is the case. Of course, 3 gigahertz CBRS benefits from both higher power as well as overall lower propagation loss, and that's going to perform better in the line of sight.
By the way, one thing I want to comment on, because we actually have this question at times. The old way of thinking in wireless is that higher power is always better, and the way to get through trees and around things is to blast power. And the world's changed a bit. And what I mean by that is with tools like this that are more finesse tools, there's enough processing now that you can do this in a finesse way. You don't have to blast it in order to win. And interestingly, a Tarana node is a more friendly node to other nodes around it. You'd think it would be, in the old days, the new thing that does the best is blasting everybody out of the sky. Nowadays, the new system is actually being very precise about their energies being sent, and therefore it's actually a better neighbor. And we've had customers tell us this, that actually when they put Tarana up, they find it not disturbing their other devices as much or at all. And that's because it's a finesse play. But with that finesse, you also get enough distance that you don't need the power. You don't have to, blast, in order to get it done. So it's a really different approach, really fundamentally different approach. So this kind of power levels we're talking about, people say, well, it's only that much power. You know what? You saw what we're doing there, 5, 10, 20 miles if it's line of sight, 30 miles sometimes, right? Yep.
So I know that this is a 6 gig announcement, but something that I've heard as a constant theme from my colleagues that aren't using CBRS yet is fear of suspensions. I'm not certain how this will play out with the AFC, if that's something that is a concept that will be in 6 gig, but something you didn't talk about on here that I think is a really powerful component of the platform is your hit with suspension feature. Could you speak about that a little bit?
And the good news with 6 gig, there's no real suspension. There's just a check. If it's an incumbent, you can't use that frequency and you're done. There's not, the CBRS does have that challenge where in CBRS you can get a call, the boss can call and say, stop transmitting, which is kind of irritating, to say the
Yes,
least.
it is.
Now, we've done a lot of work to try to make that work better. And again, it comes back to multiple carriers is actually very key here, because we can migrate customers over to the other carrier that's not affected, assuming that they're not both affected. So having the number of carriers actually, in some way, mitigates the problems only in CBRS. And this is not going to happen in 6 gigahertz. This is really a CBRS issue. So we've seen CBRS availability go from pretty tough to pretty good, I would say. And there's a bunch of people here that do CBRS. We're shipping a lot of it. I think you would probably agree it's workable. Yeah, exactly. You're right. Yeah.
And the other thing that's actually happening, which is really positive right now, is that the rules are now finally being improved in CBRS in order to really increase the availability and have the DPAs be kind of less of a nuisance. So, for example, right now, the time that it takes that's required for you to renew your license has been increased. So you can keep the license much longer, and you're not going to be confronted with lack of availability as the Wind Forum and the OnGo Alliance are really understanding that in order to make CBRS a wild success, which they really want to do, you need to make sure that the rules are as friendly as possible. And, there's certainly a movement in the right direction there as well.
A question from the live stream audience,
Mhm.
if I may. Someone from the UK is asking, so when are we going to get there?
Call me. Not. So we actually are now in a number of countries, and we are actually expanding into the UK, but we've not started our team there, but we are actually engaged in the UK. So if you have an opportunity in the UK, reach out to our sales team through marketing. We'll be happy to talk to you. So we are just now starting in the UK, actually.
And
Yeah, my question has to do with noise and interference to other radios. We plan on implementing this, but also if you've got existing radios that are sort of in the same area of the bands you're going to use, how much interference is it going to cost to those radios or to a competitor that, because you hear that some people say you interfere with everybody.
Well, I mean, okay, so obviously, first of all, there's no free lunch, right? All wireless systems, if they're transmitting, are emitting power. We're just much more careful about where we emit it, and we're quite a bit more friendly to neighboring systems. And I think, Nathan's here, you've had experience with this. I've had a number of customers who have put our systems up, Cam, where basically the disturbance to nearby systems has been, I think, arguably less than traditional. I'm not saying it, I would not say there's no chance it's going to interfere. I don't think anybody could tell you that, by the way. If somebody told you that, I might question them. But as far as them interfering with us, the converse, as long as it's spatially not perfectly aligned with the house you're trying to serve, we're going to be able to basically avoid that, in most cases, right? I don't know if you want to go any further with that, Sergio.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what we're doing on the nulling side, we are placing receive NAS that protect us every 200 microseconds, 5,000 times a second, which really allows us to be extraordinarily quick to adapt in order to not be affected by unlicensed interference. We're trying to do our best to be good neighbors and null out by not transmitting the direction of the interference as much as we can, but we are only updating those NAS once every 5 milliseconds or so, which means hopefully we're going to be able to null out the more major interference, but we can't guarantee, and we're not guaranteeing in any way that we're nulling out everybody.
Right.
So we're a good neighbor, better than others, but we're still a neighbor, and sometimes neighbors throw parties.
Sometimes neighbors throw parties. That's a good, I like it. That was a great one, yeah.
While Kristen's getting to the next one, there's another live stream.
But by
question.
the way, as a comment on what Sergio said about, not about the party, there is a party. The recalculation rate of our beamforming solution is 200 times faster than 3GPP. So we're recalculating where to send the energy 200 times faster than a typical 3GPP network. So, you know, it's a real difference fundamentally. Yeah.
Another live stream question,
Oh.
if I may. So it's a simple one, which is which spectrum bands will be available with the X2 feature?
Right.
When
So,
it's ready.
so initially, right, the first version of this, and we had said this originally, that we're, you know, it's going to be a combination. It's going to be on our 6 GHz platform. Therefore, you'll be able to place carriers in any of Uni 3, 5, and 7. We also have a project to potentially do this in 5 only. The one thing about doing it in 5 only, and there's been interest expressed, and we commented it on in our X2 release, is that you have less spectrum to place the carriers in. If you're going to do X2, you got 4 carriers of 40 megahertz. So that's the thing we're kind of evaluating whether the payback for our customers is really gonna pan out. But that is doable as well.
And in CBRS?
I commented that about the possibility someday of multiple carriers that you know, let's just say, yeah, someday we'll do that. Yeah. Okay, good. One more question, we're going to wrap.
Hi, guys. I'd just like to say you're fantastic in the equipment you're making. It's given us a new lease on life. I'm from Canada, and we've been able to compete in markets where we couldn't compete before with the older equipment.
Love it.
Yeah, it's
Thank
just marvelous.
Thank you.
And I have 2 questions. When is the app going to be released? And oh my goodness, I talked too much. I forgot the second question.
Well, let us tap dance a little bit while you think of your other question. So the app, was Rakesh here? Where's Rakesh? Rakesh, when is the app going to be released? This is the install. You're talking about the install app, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's October end for the early access. And if you guys find more bugs, it may be November for the GA or within a week or 2.
Hold on, say it again because I couldn't hear you. Say again.
October end for the early access.
October end for early access. October end
Yes.
for early access. So it's really close. We've gotten versions in the house. So I think GA when, Rakesh?
GA is subject to the number of bugs found. So
Right, so let's call it-
November. Yes.
Okay.
Can I get it off
I
him
told you
today?
there'd be dancing involved. So I would say safely, you know, Q1 will have it up and running. You'll get an early version of this quarter.
Oh, my second question was, when are you going to have a self-install kit?
Yes, good question. So we have one customer in particular, Digital Path in California, that's actually done a bunch of work on this. And we've kind of watched and tried to figure out, okay, is there, you know, obviously putting those signal indicators on the device was in part motivated by the idea of a self-install. We think you can do you can do it a self-install now. I mean, there's a question of, you know, will the install be done properly and all those kinds of things that you have to deal with as a service provider. So the way I would put it this way, people say a Starlink's a self-install. If Starlink's a self-install, we are definitely a self-install.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting at. Exactly.
I'll say that. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Good.
Oh, and
I
they
think-
didn't pay me to say that good stuff either.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. That was really great. All righty, guys. Hey, thank you very much to the live stream audience. I really appreciate your time. And if you hung in there with us, we really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.